Guess I'll hand it to our treasurer, Barry, to kind of lead us off, give us the highlights.
Okay, on the second page, with the comments on it, that those are, things we don't believe we're going to, change the constant yield rate. If we leave it, this tax rate the same, we get a potential increase of revenue over last year of 83,500. County tax differential, we based on preliminary estimates. I don't expect that to change much. They gave us some preliminary numbers. We have a revised estimate for the HUR grant, 318,000. The state police grant, I based on this year's amount because we don't get the award amount till after budget. And we need, major point, we need $2,073,858 out of fund balance for general fund, mostly for capital outlay, but with the current budget, about 50,000 in operating costs. Now that might only be necessary if we have the worst possible year in snow removal, the gas prices go up, but we always budget expenses high and revenue low, so that may not actually be necessary, but that's the way the numbers are working. And one of the things that has changed this year is Maryland State Retirement has jacked up their rates a little bit, and that's 43,000 higher over last year's estimate, just with the pension rates. If you look at the next page, it's just an overview of FY20 revised against the FY21 draft. You can see the difference between the two in the third column. The biggest change in expenditures is streets, and part of that is they anticipate about 40,000 increase in waste hauling and rates, and also they want and badly need an additional person for streets. So that's why streets has gone up a bit. And the police are also down in Capitol asking for an additional car this year. But you, so anyone, other questions on the differences between year to year?
Any questions on the summary as you see it? Okay. I'll ask the council how they want to go through the budget itself. Do you want to go department by department? Do you want to hit highlights? I assume you've all had an opportunity to look at it on your own, hopefully make some notes. Is there a preference from the council how you want to handle it?
I say, I mean, you know, we don't necessarily have to go into incredible detail, but we could work it department by department with highlights per department.
Okay.
If
Is that
that,
acceptable?
That's fine.
All right, we shall do so.
Okay, and then it's about 4 pages in, and you can see the revenue. I've kind of hit the highlights on the revenue, and anything that we didn't have hard numbers for, I took a 3-year average based on the 3 years to project revenue, so that way we don't have to spend much time on the revenue, and we can go right through the departments. I just mentioned that because it was first. So, all right, on page, where it says page 4 of 12 is budget with mayor and council. Spending's actually dropped slightly in materials and supplies, actually about 50% in materials and supplies. There really weren't any other changes. Finance department, we made no changes other than incremental amounts in, we also budgeted 3% increase for staff. So in the, we really didn't change anything in the finance department. city manager, some of the expenses, I think, were, I think we kept it pretty much the same there. And IT has increased their software support, and part of that is, what is it called?
Power DMS.
The Power DMS, and, yeah, it's the Power DMS that's the increase in that. I was thinking it was another thing, but that's what I have written.
Right, but that was also offset by a decrease in printers and cartridges as well, so they kind of balance each other out between those two.
No, that's true. You know, with the, I think he said with the new program, it required less. He was saying. No changes really at all to the clerk department. Zoning and had a drop in the certified expenditure payment, but Jim could explain that better than I can.
That's for the revitalization incentive, and we had earmarked some monies thinking that someone who had done substantial renovations was going to apply for the program, and they never followed through. And right now, we don't have knowledge of any big projects in the pipeline that would be applying for that 10%. Left some money in there. I know there's one building that the owners are talking about doing some renovations, and just in the event that they should be interested in the program and finish work by the end of this year, then they would get their credit back the following year. So we just put some money in there to allow for up to $50,000 of building improvements that might qualify. But that's really a guess. We don't know if anybody's going to really apply for the program this year or not.
Okay.
But we want to have some money there in case they do.
Right.
We made no changes to planning and zoning or code enforcement. In economic development, we determined that this $20,000 amount that has been budgeted for several years for contractual has never been used, so we eliminated that, and so we reduced that by 20,000.
And that was discussed with Nancy, just so you all know. We asked her specifically, what was this for? She said she never even knew what it was for. It had been put in there for 4 or 5 years, and she never had an explanation.
It was put, let me get it right.
I was thinking of the marketing initiative.
It was what?
Initially, I thought that it might have been the marketing initiative, but that's the following line. that we
Right,
put in.
it's a separate line.
Oh, gosh.
What that was for.
It was specifically put in there when Jay and I were looking into what to do about the blighted property. And we had to put it somewhere.
The receivership.
Yes,
Right, which we abandoned that.
yeah,
That
that's what it
concept,
was put
yeah.
in there
Okay.
for. Nancy just forgot.
I forgot until about 2
Yeah,
seconds ago.
mhm.
Biggest change to City Hall is telephone communication has dropped considerably with our new phone system. And interest expense is down a bit because we're paying more principal on the debt service. We dropped about 1,000 in electric and fuel for the annex. Head Start, we pretty much, we kept similar. The insurance changed a bit. Public safety, this has the police department fully staffed as they are now. They have added more in special events overtime because they're hoping to have police there for more activities this year, more parades, events, and things like that. So they've increased that.
Now, can you just explain a little better? Them being present at parades will be out of salaries. So are the events more of police type of events, like I guess buying candy for events, or
No, that's
National Night Out or something like that?
where they capture their overtime, if they're
Is,
working an event.
The special, as it was explained to me by the chief, in part that has to do with things like Wine Fest, things that are, that fall under, for example, Main Street.
okay,
And I think also Carnival was another major.
okay, so the special events overtime is, okay, thank you.
And there may be need to bring extra officers on when we do traffic control for parades in addition to who would normally be on the shift.
Okay.
They've made some increases to travel, training, and education. There's been a lot of officers who have been falling behind in certification with the short staffing, so he's trying to remedy that. And I really don't see any other changes here. There's a change in the capital.
Would this be an appropriate time for me to request something from the police department, or do you want to save that as discussionary material for later in the evening?
Let's do discussion. After we finish general fund, we can start discussing those things.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No real change in police secretary. Or crossing guard. And then in the streets, we have added an additional staff person. The 5 people, it will be then for whose home department or street are budgeted 90% to streets and then 10% to parks. Just because I've been studying the labor for 4 years, and I'm trying to get the budgeted amount as close to what's actually occurring as possible. The big thing there, the solid waste recycling, and Kevin said that's due to growth and a price increase, and like I say, this is budgeted conservatively, which means that we're probably going to spend a little bit less than that, but that was his estimated increase. Don't see any other real changes here. The big thing was adding the additional staff person.
The extra for equipment purchase, I guess that's outside of capital.
That's capital. The what?
That is capital, or is that,
Equipment purchase?
so it went from 4,000 to 10,000. Is there something
Oh,
outside of
right.
capital that they're purchasing?
What he's got there. Replaced, he has a root grapple attachment for the skid loader,
Okay.
and I guess that's not quite capital, but it,
Looking to pull up trees, I guess. Okay.
yeah, that was just a perfect nonsense phrase to me, but. Okay. Yeah, so, yeah, no other real changes there. We budget 80,000 for snow and ice removal. I don't think for FY20 we're gonna see that at all.
Right.
Which is, but you never know. Okay. Parks and Recreation, does get a little bit of that impact of the 5th person, at 10%. If there's any other comments here.
Events is up.
Hmm?
Events,
Events, right.
more events.
Yeah, more events.
And we also bumped up materials and supplies just in anticipation of kind of the renewed focus on parks with doing a little bit more than we've done in past years as far as ongoing repairs and replacing things.
Well, that would be under maintenance and repairs.
I'm sorry, materials
Okay.
and supplies.
Like flyers for advertising events or things like that? Is that what we're thinking?
That's
Sorry, I jumped
under,
ahead.
Event flyers are under printed, but
I see the budget for advertising went from 500 down to 0. I feel like there would be more of a need for advertising with the increased events instead of none.
Now, which line went up for the, maintenance?
sorry, that's my error.
Okay.
There should be 500 there.
Okay, so advertising for Parks and Rec should be 500.
So sorry about that.
So maintenance and repairs went up a little over 10.
Yep.
So the advertising should be 500?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is that enough for maintenance and repairs? I understand there's a lot going on down at those parks that need to be done.
I think for her first year, I think it'll be, I mean, it's an $11,000 increase.
Which is nothing.
Well, yeah.
It's also keeping under consideration our capacity to do those things in-house also. So we don't, even with having an additional person in Public Works, that doesn't mean they're gonna be free to jump on everything that happens down there still. So I think
Right.
we're still gonna be a little limited as to being able to tackle every single thing that needs to be done.
My concern is that 11 doesn't tackle one thing.
Well, can I ask if, I mean, the capital improvement program is separate or part of? Okay.
Separate.
So is that maybe what you're thinking of, Diane, some of those things that we'd been discussing in the past?
No, I'm
regular
just thinking,
maintenance.
yeah, I'm just thinking of things that are wrong right now, like, the gazebo, you know, sinking, and, the walking trail over at Roberts Mill.
Well, that's a capital
That's on
project.
capital. That one is under capital.
What's that one?
Roberts Mill Trail is a
The trail
capital
is.
project.
It's a capital?
Yep. But this will be like putting a grate over the top of a chimney.
So the kids won't fall in it.
Right. It's mending a fence that gets busted or things like, I mean, it's repairs that come up throughout the year.
Well, so let me ask you if I might. I mean, Diane, what number would you feel more comfortable with?
I don't
than-
know, I just know
You think
that,
it
you
should be-
know, you can eat through money like I don't know what.
I feel like Marina will have a better idea after a full year of.
Right. I mean,
seeing
it's-
what comes up.
I mean, we're under a new person who may be more attentive than what there was in the past, so we may see more usage of it. It all also depends what other projects she's working on, and she may not get through all of this, but.
And if we have to, we could amend the budget in the future if needed. Is that okay, Diane? Or you still think we should add something to it?
I think as Joe makes a good point, as Marina gets up to speed and more comfortable with things and develops her routine, we may see that she's able to, you know, focus more on that than we're expecting, in which case we may need to amend just midway through. But right now, based on the mid-year of 8,300 and budget amount of 22,000, we're less than having spent 50% of that at the mid-year point in the budget year. So we're still, you know, making a substantial increase to that. And again, with it being her first year, she's gonna have to feel things out and see where she can spend her time and what that really equates to as far as, you know, supplies and repairs and things like that. So, but it certainly gives us, I mean, you know, it's a third more
Right.
than we spent before, so.
Actually, it's 50% more, yeah. So,
Okay.
once again, we have the generic contractual. Do we have an explanation for Parks and Rec of what contractual is, since it's spent $3,500 so far in FY20?
Isn't that CDM and stuff like that?
Well, that would be consulting and engineering, right?
Would that be lawn service and stuff?
Nope, that's under mowing.
Oh, sorry.
Marina's worksheet.
Does that have to do with things like the MOUs that we're gonna be getting into? Maybe,
No, because that's not
No.
really financially
Okay.
tied.
There's no comment on it. I'm not sure what goes under there. I've never
Well, see, something was coded under
Oh,
it, so
yeah.
I'm not sure. Okay. If you can just follow up with
Yeah, I'll
us
I'll
and
find
let
out
us know exactly what that line means.
Okay.
Which line are we talking?
Contractual,
Contractual,
5510 there.
Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Barry, under GL Code 5000, is that taking into account part of some Parker Recs, the street guys?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's,
That's 20%.
10% of each of their salaries,
10%
yeah.
of 5 street staff.
All right, thank you.
Plus, there's a tiny bit of Kevin that gets allocated there too, because he oversees their projects.
Just a tiny bit, like his big toe. Tiny, tiny bit.
And one of the safety program implementation has been moved to the, with Bob to the police.
It just followed him down there.
That's the end of the general expenses. So-
Okay, yeah, we,
All right, so Councilman Vigliotti, you had something to bring up under police?
Yes, sir. The chief and the major have requested an additional $30,000 that has not been accounted for in the budget as of yet, with the intent to hire one more additional officer. The thought being that with the way that things are right now, there aren't enough officers to adequately cover all shifts, and the fact that, for example, on Saturdays, there's only one officer covering one of the shifts on Saturday. The chief is uncomfortable with that. In addition, there are scheduling difficulties, and as per the adequate facilities ordinance, which requires two officers for every 1,000 people, they want to bring up the number of officers on the street to 14. And the idea that they want to start this now because they know that the census is coming up, and they want to make sure that we are adequate for the population that we have now, and the fact that this potential officer would not be able to actually take the street until October 2021.
And so we wouldn't be budgeting for the officer's salary until 21.
Well,
This
the-
30,000 is just for the
Well, this
academy.
is-
$30,000 would be part salary and fringe benefits.
Okay.
I have it closer to 35.
35.
I think it's a good idea, Joe. And it still puts us sort of kind of at the edge of not being called up. You know what I mean? With 14 officers, we'll be at the 7,000 population mark. And it still has us a little bit behind, but I think it's a good idea, good initiative.
Well, the discussion of there only being one officer on weekends, this one officer isn't going to fix that when we have 3 coming out of the academy. That's going to be the biggest change, them having adequate coverage on the weekends, when they get those 3 officers out. I would hope that once they're out, we're not still going to have one person on a shift on a weekend.
Right, but the other thing that they're bearing in mind, they're also trying to take contingencies into effect as well, or
Of
into
course.
account as well.
Right, I understand. Historically, which I've disagreed with, was the usage of adequate facilities ordinance, including the administrative officers, like the chief, lieutenants, things like that, and that's something we need to get away from. Chief Etzler, Major Mitchell, even Lieutenant Costello, I don't believe should be counted as patrol officers in that adequate facilities ordinance. Where are we now, including the 3 recruits that are in there?
We'll be at 13, so this, the additional officer would bring us up to the 14 on the street, and that would exclude the chief and the major from being out.
Right.
So if you were looking to get away from having the lieutenant out on the street as well, I mean, I could certainly
Well,
go.
I mean, the lieutenant, he can respond, so I think it's, we can count him in the
Okay.
meantime.
So yeah, it would be the one additional officer. And Barry, they had mentioned 35 to you?
That's what she figured out.
That's
Okay.
what, that's her figures.
Okay.
just to make sure everybody's on the same page, that's really only paying for half a year for the officer. So in the future year, we'd be looking at.
You have to pay the full thing. It's a much larger impact as we go forward.
And again, just to make sure everyone's aware, with the recent changes in the department, we actually have one additional officer, or will have when they're out of the academy, than we had, staff positions last year, because of having a couple higher salary people move on, we were able to, without a budget increase, bring in an additional officer. So we've gotten one additional officer from where we were a year ago, as far
Right.
as, number of officers out on the street. So we're already up one as far as the APFO goes. And again, that's counting administrative officers in there, which has always been a point of contention for the department. But just to make sure that you guys have a little more of the full picture there, and the cost ongoing, we're talking about an additional $70,000 or more a year, not just the 35 we're talking about now. So,
Well, and Barry, that, your 35 is salary
And benefits.
and benefits. That's not including the equipment, which even going into academy, there's gonna be substantial equipment have to be purchased, uniforms. I mean,
Certain
their
equipment.
car won't come into play for at least a year, but they'll have to have one at their disposal when they're on shift. I talked to Chief Etzler and I told him that I just don't think this is the year for it. I think we need a little more growth, get a little more of that revenue to come in. He and I agree on what our magic number of officers should be. I just don't know if this is the year to make it happen, personally speaking. But it's up to the council if they see otherwise.
I think if we can swing it, we should do it.
Well, there's question of whether we can swing it, because we're already funding a portion of the regular general budget out of fund balance already, $50,000. So the budget itself is not even balanced right now. It's already kind of in the hole with itself. Let alone, and then of course capital, that's a different thing. If it were balanced already, or if it came out with a surplus, that's a whole different story. But we're already borrowing from ourselves to balance a budget by $50,000. So now we're gonna make it $85,000 or more if we add another officer. And that's kind of my place of thinking that I don't think this is the year to do it. We would need a much closer to balanced budget for that to happen.
I would argue, I'm sorry, were you?
No.
I thought you were gonna say something, I'm sorry. So I would argue 2 points of that fact. First of all, as Jim said, that, the cost would increase in years forward, but if we were to approach it this year, it would almost be like a step. It wouldn't just be suddenly 70, it would be 35 and then 70 the following year. Almost like we ease our way into it.
Right, but if we don't do it this year, then next year it's gonna be 35 and then 70 after that.
Which, second point being that we want to make sure that, in my mind anyways, I'd like to have, to meet that threshold of having, enough officers based on the reporting from the last census.
Well, and just to stir the pot a little more, I mean, we seem to have a better relationship with state police, the sheriff, we've got other people to draw some of that from. I would love to be able to do it, but I think the point is we are trying to find an equal balance. We are trying to finally not keep taking money out of
the fund balance, right. Like I said, if this were balanced in and of itself, forgetting capital, I'm completely on board. But we're already borrowing out of fund balance just to balance our regular budget. And that's what makes me think this is just not the year. We can survive another year before we add another officer. Because we're already adding another officer above and beyond what we had the previous year.
by
Well, you
by
remember-
budgeting in a conservative manner, we've managed to kind of weather the storms when, through the recession, we didn't have to lay anybody off, because we've pulled from fund balance to balance the budget. I think in terms of, our operating budget, if you want to increase expenses and bring on more people or provide more services, we need to be looking at the revenue side. We can't structurally, we can't just say, oh, we'll take it from fund balance. And because that's not sustainable. If you start,
Right.
This year we're budgeting to take 50 out without an additional officer, without the second person Kevin requested, without having somebody to do code enforcement, without, a number of other things that have been talked about and never delivered or never done.
Right.
So, and then next year, the way the numbers are playing out, we may be taking the full $70,000 salary plus the 50 that we're looking at this year, and you just can't keep doing that. You need to, just structurally, it doesn't work long-term. So I think that, and again, I think Chief Etzler has a very good plan. I wish the numbers worked to be able to do that. I don't think that we should have an officer on a shift by his or herself. But again, taking money out of fund balance to add services or add staff, it just is not structurally the way to go, in my opinion. I mean, you need to be, if you really want to do these things and you want to do them now, you need to increase your revenue, not
Right.
deplete, essentially savings, or the next recession, the next, tough couple years we have, we're not gonna have that cushion to get us by. And, we had these talks over the water rates and, borrowing out of fund balance to pay this down or pay that down instead of the user rates. And, we made a sound decision there not to do that, eventually you would deplete fund balance and be in a dire situation.
Our goal needs to be the exact opposite. We need to be getting revenue to add to fund balance as opposed to continually taking away from it.
And I know it's been said in conversations that the city gives a lot away. It's, just, again, thinking we're pulling $50,000 from fund balance to make this operating budget balance, and we're also talking about the parking meter thing. Now, that's only $6,500 a year, but again, that's $6,500 now that's coming out of fund balance. So it all plays in there, so just please keep that.
And I'm not advocating sustained, spending of that sort. I'm not. But I'm also approaching this from a perspective of public safety and an eye to the future. Because again, we're approximately 7,000 people now. I have no idea what the census is going to put us at in the future. And as everybody knows, I completely oppose spending money that we do not have, right? But if we have to borrow from the general fund for this, right, I would advocate for it because, again, it's a question of stepping into being prepared for the future at this point. Again, whatever the council decides, I'll abide with, but, I think this is very important given the fact that we are considering that we want to grow, that we want to expand who we are, that we're looking at, changes in the coming years. And I want to make sure that, at least on the public safety side of things, we are adequately prepared to meet those changes.
Well, Joe, I've always agreed. I mean, I've sat up here in these budgets before, and Barry, I think you're setting a record for the most amount of people attending most of those meetings, of one. So when it comes to the budget, it's our responsibility to do what's best for the city. And if fund balance, taking money out that way is not a great way to go. But we also got to look at revenue. We have a little bit of an opportunity with Meads coming on board, and the revenue we're going to get there. So we sort of, at 14 officers, we still won't be at the 7,000 mark. So we're behind, and we shouldn't leave that way. We have to do what we have to do responsibly for the city. And, it never scares me to think that way when it comes to what we're doing here, because if we're not doing it as we go through and we get, that's not being fixed, and we keep doing the same things that the city's done from time to time in certain circumstances the same way as they did 50 years ago. So I think it's a good idea. It shows great initiative. I think the chief's got a good way of thinking there. And again, we got to think about, the weapon, the vehicle, all those things, the fitment of the vehicle. It's going to be a lot more than that if we're not planning for it.
It's gonna be that whether we plan for it or not, but
If I might point out something, one of the drops in the police revenue has been in the state police grant that we apply for every year. I've noticed that, a couple of years ago, it was about 120,000, and it's dropped down to 95,000. But applying for that grant, it's based on how much we budget and how much we spend. And spending has been down due to staffing in the police department for a couple of years. So I'm hoping that police grant revenue will start coming back up when they're fully staffed and have, they have more officers, they get an account of the officers, they look at all of that when they, we apply for that grant. So I'm hoping we'll start getting a higher amount of revenue.
But that's gonna be a year away,
That's gonna be,
at least. And at that point, we're gonna have the 3, which will be an addition, so it's already going to be higher. So that's what I'm saying is a year, not this year, look at it the following year, and most likely we'll be in a much better position to do so. I just don't think this is the year for it.
If we do, and I'll take your point that we wait a year, but that means that this potential officer could not take the field until then, probably October 2022.
Right,
And again, I have no idea where the census is gonna put us this year.
right.
And if
No
we
one
end
knows.
up with far more people than we have officers to cover, yeah, I really couldn't abide by that, I guess is the best way that I could put it. I wanna make the case that we just should be prepared for the potential change. And I get completely where, we're coming from with the fund balance. Because, goodness knows how many discussions that have I had in previous years about, not counting houses that haven't been built yet to spend money for those that haven't come in as revenue. But in a situation like this is something that is gonna have to be, in my mind, projected. Not in terms of the increased revenue, because, Jim is right about that. We are gonna have to have a discussion about the revenue in and of itself. But in terms of the public safety, this is almost like, I would call it an investment. It's a step that we have to take uncertainly in terms of the population, because we don't know what that population is gonna be.
Well, but I would also argue that we just gave them all raises, substantial raises, and that was the investment, was the.
That the rest of the city staff has not seen, which was
Right,
talked
so
about at the time.
it's, I mean, and again, I understand the importance of the police department, and we're looking ahead. But I don't think it's fair to keep throwing these things up and saying, well, suddenly the police want this, suddenly the police want their raises, suddenly they want an extra person. And it's good to plan ahead, but planning ahead means actually planning, not just saying, okay, right now, I want this. And again, I'm all for having the right amount, but let's wait and see what the numbers are. Maybe it hasn't changed that much. Maybe just as many people have left. If you read Facebook, everybody's leaving. The water bills are too high. But we can plan ahead by being ready for next year. I mean, again, with the 3 people coming out, he's getting all the ducks in a row. Things are definitely improving in the police department. I just don't feel like we're not Baltimore. I mean, it's not like we've got, and I'll just leave it there. We don't have an overabundance of crime that we have to have a police officer on every single corner right now. And again, I would love to be able to do it, but I can't in good conscience spend money we aren't bringing in. I mean, that was the main thing, is we're supposed to be responsible. We're supposed to be making sure that this money is here. I mean, there is a certain amount of money you're supposed to have in savings. I would love to be the person that spends on credit, but I can't.
And I certainly take those points, especially including for raises for the rest of the city staff. I've been a supporter of that for years. I respectfully disagree with the idea that there was raises for the officers. There was a salary realignment in order to keep the department competitive with local agencies.
Yeah, they got pretty
Because
big raises,
it-
because we didn't do that for anybody else.
We didn't
We
also
didn't do
had
it
a
for anybody else,
situation in 2017 that we didn't have elsewhere, too.
Well, and again, I mean, we're
And
always
we
gonna
didn't
have
plan for it,
situations.
we just did it.
Right.
Well, and it wasn't because we just decided to do it, though. There was a situation that had,
I understand, but again, we didn't plan for it, Joe.
right. Now, the other thing, and to your other point about, the number of officers that we do have, and you'd mentioned earlier about the sheriff and the state police and everything. It's better to have a local force that's closer, able to respond to an emergency.
It is, but they're very visual, visible now. Like, I see them regularly driving through town.
It
We
is.
have such a good relationship with them
I
now,
agree,
much
it
better
is
than we
better. In a
have.
perfect world, you're right, it is
Yeah.
better.
But-
But you do what you gotta do.
And that's why I'm advocating for it.
Well,
And I get
okay, you
that.
do what you gotta do, and we're on opposite sides of that.
Joe, to your defense, I understand that most likely we'll be in a better position next year, but we can't guarantee that. We might have a repeat of this conversation, and then we're looking at putting the 14th officer on the road in 2023.
So then imagine, if you will, that we do this now, and we only have to pay half the salary, but we're not in a better position the next year. Now we have to pay the full salary and equipment, and we're not in a better position. You've now put us further back from where we should be at that point. It's,
So
again, the whole reason we don't account for growth in these sorts of things is because they could go bankrupt any moment, and all of a sudden building stops, you don't get anything else out of it. The same concept goes here. We don't know what the future is going to hold. If we bind ourselves to having one more officer and then find out we have such a major shortfall that now we need to get rid of somebody, and we don't ever want to have that happen.
Can I ask a question? If, I think it's a fair compromise, Joe, to wait one more year. But, if the numbers come out and it starts to become apparent that we really did need this 14th officer, could we do a budget amendment? Could we revisit the issue before the
Well,
next
the thing
cycle?
about
Theory, that would work, but the problem is that they were hoping to get this guy into the academy and,
No,
on this.
and I understand.
So that would still put it back a year.
And that's where police are different from, public works or any other department, where, generally you can hire someone off the street, you get them trained up in 2-3 months really adequately, whereas with police, it's a long process to filter out the right person, then get them into the academy, get them through the academy, cross your fingers that they get through the academy. Then you have, field training, then you have probation. It's a much longer period. So it's not one of those, oh, the money's there, we really need them, all right, go get them. It's a much longer process. I completely agree that there's a magic number our police department needs to operate at. I don't believe this is the year to make it happen with how this budget has turned out. The fact that we're still not being able to get a balanced budget, we're pulling out of fund balance. It's $50,000, but if we start on this track of, okay, well, another $35,000, okay, well, over here, why don't we just, Kevin needs that other guy that he's been asking for a few years. Okay, we'll pencil that in real quick. All of a sudden, we're pulling $200,000 out of fund balance. I think we need to be a lot more careful with that sort of thinking. I agree that they should have another person. I just don't think this is a year to do it. We need to put it on hold and revisit in another year. Especially having 3 coming out of the academy in July. That's a time to kind of rebalance and see what's coming. They could find that, with efficiencies that Chief Etzler puts in place, we could find that it's actually adequate. We don't know. I don't want to start throwing money at it before we really understand the kind of growth we're already getting in that department.
I take that point. But again, it's a question of being prepared for the future. I know I keep saying that over and over again. I know
Right.
I keep coming back to say it. It's not really throwing money. These are the guys who are out on the streets. They have this understanding of what they need to adequately do the job. And both as liaison and advocate for the department, it's something that it's certainly convinced me about.
Right, I understand. And again, they're already going to be one person ahead of what they were last year when these recruits come out of the academy. So, Barry, you had your...
Well, I was going to say too, and they're budgeting for this person to go into the academy in January anyway. So that's like a 6-month period once these new guys come on. If they go a couple of months in, then they decide they really need a third person, and we possibly have more money because, something happened to indicate there'd be more money, then they could still do a budget amendment and get someone in there in time for January.
I think that's fair.
With the length of the hiring process, I don't know that we would actually be able to do that.
Hey.
Because they're... I'm sorry?
This past year, I ran several amounts of numbers with the chief, and he was trying to see if he could fit a third person in January. So they did manage to get that done.
Right. I mean, these recruits are graduating July 31st, I believe. That hiring process would really need to start in July to get through the entire process, the background check, the physical agility test, the psych eval, all of those steps, because they really need to be decided on early to middle of December. And, essentially have them start locally before going to the academy first, second week of January. So I understand if they rush the process, then that could work. I feel like by the time they get these three out, their field training is not going to be over until end of September, and that's when we actually realize, the impact they're going to have on our department and on the city. And at that point, it's way too late to add anybody else, for sure. And even then, we're not going to get a full realization of them for at least a year, in reality. I mean, you get your 8 weeks of field training. They're going to be on probation. I think it's, 2 years now is what Chief Etzler's put in place. So, a year. But that's my take. Jim, you look like you're...
There was some mention about the increase that was given to the readjustment or reclassing police salaries a couple years ago. And again, this budget for yet another year doesn't do anything for the rest of the employees.
Right.
So, back then, we did, the police department got a substantial percentage increase to bring our wages up to a competitive point with the world around us. And I don't know in what world you can think that we fell behind in one department and not others.
Yeah.
But we
Well, at the
never
time-
caught up the rest, and each year it's, well, we just can't do it this year, or we just can't do it this year. I would love to put that in this year. Barry did some research, and it was like 2% and change, like for state, I guess, that's kind of a COLA amount.
I think so, yeah.
That was around that, would have been nice to be able to do a COLA plus the 3%, but the number just doesn't, not only do the numbers not justify reclassing, non-police employees, they don't even justify doing a COLA and a 3%. So the idea, and I'm looking at things citywide, again, I think the chief has a very good plan. I would love to be able to do it, but the numbers just aren't there to do it. But also, do you want to, again, do something to help the police while there's another year that's come and gone and nothing's done to catch up the rest of the city employees?
I don't.
And again, I would love to do something for everybody, but the numbers just aren't there this year. And
Which actually does bring up a very important question. Before Henry had passed away, he was working on some kind of comparative list between non-police employees for the city and other municipalities in the area to see what those salaries would have to be elevated in order to be competitive. Do you have any idea whatever ended up happening with that?
my recollection was that Henry, and I don't know if it got as far as council or just the mayor, but I think Henry was hoping to outsource a study and that there wasn't support to spend any money to do that.
How much would that cost? Or do you have
I
any?
have not looked into it.
Is that something that we could find out?
I can delve into that.
I'd appreciate that, thank you.
There is an MML compensation
they've
study,
got-
but it's.
Yeah.
Theirs is dated. They're looking to update theirs shortly, but
But it's, because municipalities our size tend to slice and dice responsibilities a little bit different from town or city to city, it's tough to really compare in a geographic, area for like our market. Clara, for example, is our city clerk, but she's also our human resources person. In other towns, the city manager is the zoning person, or they have dedicated code enforcement staff, or they slice up the duties differently you know, throughout the county and even in Frederick County. So it's very difficult to get
And
kind of an
some
apples
house,
to
one
apples.
person does everything.
And I think that's why Henry wanted to go with a consultant who could dedicate that kind of time and effort to a study to really get us a good comparison to where we stack up to the world around us.
Jim, I have a question.
More expenses.
Do you, off the top of your head, know how much, you know, for instance, if this year we did have the money to do a 3% and a COLA increase, roughly how much that would cost?
Well, the 3%'s already built into it. The COLA is 2%, right? Or 2 or 2.5,
I think it was around 2, I'm not.
around 2, right.
Once we saw the preliminary numbers, we didn't look into it.
I'm
Right.
just curious. It's not that big of a deal.
We can look at that. I can email that out to everybody.
But again, it's, you know, that COLA is great, but it's not the realignment that we took on for the police department.
Right.
And that's, you know, a lot of our pay structure was designed not based on the position, but on the person at the time. You know, that's why, you know, department heads are kind of askew on who makes what, even though they have similar duties and similar responsibilities, they make very different amounts because, well, you know, this person took benefits, this person didn't. You know, we didn't base it on the actual or on the position, we based it on the person that went into that position. And so I think, you know, a grand realignment is long overdue. It's not gonna happen this year with this budget, but it's something that needs to be undertaken, whether we have staff do it, whether we have a consultant come up with that, or whether members of the council get together and come up with that. You know, it's, if you want to look at what's best for the employees, then maybe, you know, put together a group of people to come up with such a thing. We do owe something to city staff, non-police. You know, there was a lot of heartburn over the actions taken a couple years ago. And at the time, we were, I believe, misled on the causes of those officers leaving our department. We were led to believe that it was pay that was causing them to leave. That wasn't the case. Because we fixed the pay. They still left.
They left.
Right.
So, well, some of them left. Some of them left. In all fairness, some of them left, but not all of them.
I don't regret that we did what we did for the police, but I think we need to start considering what's best for the rest of the staff. Because we have a lot of staff who have been largely ignored. I mean, they went how many years without any pay increase, Jim?
I'd have to look it up, but
Right.
we've missed, yeah.
We missed a number of them. And the 3%, that's great, you know, but we can't get warm and fuzzy over that. There needs to be a grand realignment. With this budget, Councilman, I understand where you're coming from. I appreciate your advocacy for the police department, and I'm with you on my support for them. This just isn't the year to do this. That's the issue.
Do I have to have everybody convinced tonight, or is this an ongoing process?
Oh, this is just a workshop,
Okay.
so we're not voting anything. If you want to go through and cut out $35,000 from the rest of the expenditures to make up for it, feel free to propose it. But I would say, at this point, we shouldn't be adding anything additional that's going to cause more out of fund balance to come into the budget.
So, if I may, sir.
Yes, sir?
Jim, remember many years ago when you sat here and I sat over there? And we spent a lot of money to bring the city staff up to our neighbors. If you don't keep that as part of your annual budget process, if you don't do that, you're gonna have the down police officers, parks that need repairs, what's going on with city staff. And it's I realize it's, you know, this body changes every 2 years normally, or could change, and then you get, you know, fresh people, new people in seats that just don't have sometimes the ability or desire to push forward, you know, the pay increases and keeping up our adequate facilities, ordinances and that type of thing. We just gotta, you know, if we don't guarantee that we're gonna do this next year, You know, I mean, we're making decisions tonight that, or in the next few months that, you know, some people are gonna be sitting there going, I'm not waiting around, you know? And so, you know, we gotta start being more concrete about what we're doing with our salaries, because we keep doing a lead lag thing, and it's always very costly. And I agree with you, Mayor. I think that the leadership of the police department before is what was driving people away. And we had that before too.
Right. The problem is, you know, we're into budget season and we haven't done the research to figure out what a realignment's gonna look like. And it's not something we can take on now in February and expect to have it ready for this budget. So unfortunately, that can's gonna kick down another year.
But we can begin the process. It doesn't, not that we have to have it ready for this year's budget, but the realignment for everybody.
The research and discussion needs to happen sooner rather than later. That way we are prepared for it. That helps us, you know, closely analyze how the monies are being spent in these. You know, make sure they are doing it. You know, when you see things, the example was economic development with $20,000 for contractual. It sat there for 5 years, never getting used. It was put in every year. Well, that's things that tied up money, you know, unnecessarily. I don't want people to get pay increases while sacrificing money to do their jobs as well. So we need to know what it's going to take, look at municipalities similar in size, not just those that are 5 miles away from us. We need to look at what it is in the state. And with those figures, you know, we have a year, because next year is an election year, so we're going to be doing this early next year, get through the budget. We have a year to figure this out, to make sure that we take care of all of our staff so that we can be continually satisfied with what we're getting out of them. So if that means that we need to look at adding people to a department or whatever it is, we lay out that plan now. You know, just like we do with capital improvements, we can do the same with staffing and determine on that basis. But on that note, we'll end discussion on this topic, and you may talk amongst yourselves outside of here accordingly.
Well, thank you very much for allowing the discussion, and thank you, everybody, for your input.
Thank you, Councilman,
Joe.
for that. You want to move into any of the capital outlay, or do you want to slide in the utility fund at this point?
Well, we could finish with general and look at the general capital outlay.
Sounds great. Let's do so.
Okay.
Thank you.
General capital outlay, debt service is up because we're paying more principal, less interest. That's reflected in a reduction of interest on the other, in City Hall. IT has 8,000 for, City Hall Annex security and alarm replacement. Police has 150,000, which is to replace 2 vehicles and add an additional vehicle. The Bryan Street Bridge and Roberts Mill are being rolled over from this current year. We'll probably do a late year budget amendment because we're obviously not spending the same amount 2 years in a row. We're just not going to be spending much in FY20. So we'll be reducing those amounts toward the end of the year, depending on what we actually do get spent. Kevin has, I think, one last piece of the LED retrofit, and there's some small grant money. I think we end up spending like 5,000 total. It nets. It's partially funded by grant money. We have $81,085 for a new one-ton pickup with an 8.5-foot plow. And then Parks has $143,500 to replace playground equipment in the THS park.
And the other thing is, if you look back at revenue, there is a grant to Parks and Rec for $81,128 for that project. So that's partially offset by a grant money from Program Open Space. Any questions on capital outlays? All right, moving to utility, if you would.
Okay, Public Works, we made a small modification to the revenue budget. The water restoration fee is basically the amount we collect when we turn people's water back on. And we had not been recording it separately, like as revenue, so we just rolled it back up because it's part of water service fee. Plus, as I kind of joked, it's the hall of shame of revenue, because that's where people get their water turned off and
Right.
back on. So we just moved it up there just for ease. It's the same money. Standpipe rental is the same for this year. We kept interest income about the same. We'll probably exceed that, but that depends upon how much money we keep in the bank, so we just kept it level. And the water and sewer fees, we kept at this, assumed the same rates, because even though we have more growth, the new houses are more water efficient. So we
Right.
kind of noticed that's kind of, the revenue hasn't spiked up over the last couple of years. It's been fairly steady, so that's the revenue piece.
So the question I am gonna ask, because I ask it every year,
Go ahead, I did too.
okay, is there any way that we can cut water and sewer rates? Not this year?
No, not if we want to, keep, because even after, we get if we look at the year end with depreciation and everything, we don't budget for depreciation, but there's, it's kind of offset a little bit by the, if you look at the year end, it's the benefit assessment fees are really making it look like we're bringing lots of money, but on the bottom line, but most of that is the benefit assessment fee, so that's just, by the time we cover depreciation, we're breaking even.
I always have to ask.
Yep.
I can show you a chart at some point.
And keeping in mind, we're still pulling $3.5 million out of the fund balance for the capital projects in hopes of creating better efficiency in our system to hopefully reduce cost or reduce expenses, particularly wastewater treatment plant. I'm thinking about the Roberts Mill project, and hopefully improving the sewer lines going through there. But I asked the same question, and I knew you would too, so thank you for not disappointing me.
Well, at least two of us are on it, right?
That's right.
And I think Kevin has increased maintenance and repairs on the water budget by about 10,000, but there's really been not many major changes in anything otherwise. Interest expense is being reduced because we're paying more in principal on the debt service, so. And going down to sewer, he's bumped up materials and supplies again, but let's see if he has any notes on that. Yeah, he says the cost of his chemicals to run the ENR has increased significantly, so that is why his materials and supplies have gone up. Another note on the utility budget is that with what they bring in on the budget, they can actually cover part of their debt service, and we're not pulling anything to fund utility from fund balance other than the capital.
Did I, under sewer insurance, did I miss the explanation on that? How it's budgeted 0 as opposed to 38,000 for FY20? And same with the water side. It went from 7,500 down to 0, and it looks like we already spent more than what was budgeted for FY20.
I'm sorry, that's,
Okay. Do you anticipate keeping the same figures
yes, I
this year?
anticipate keeping
Okay.
the same figures.
So under water,
Actually, insurance, should be a little bit lower because we didn't pay out nearly as much. That insurance amount is a once a year hit.
okay.
It's paid in like December, so I would say we could drop that to 30,000 for sewer.
Okay, so sewer 30,000. But I see the water has, we've paid out more than what was budgeted, so do you want to make that 8,000
Or 7,600, it's,
or 76? Okay.
I apologize, I thought I'd plugged all those things in. But that's not, they're still doing well with, money over fund balance.
Right,
because they
right.
don't- They don't need to, I'll adjust the front comment, but
What was the number again for the sewer insurance? I'm sorry.
Sewer, we had 30,000,
30,000 instead of 38?
correct.
All right, thank you.
I can, revise this and get this out tomorrow and.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, before we get into utility capital, is there any discussion regarding the utility fund budget? Revenue or expenditures? Okay. You can step into capital, Barry, if you would.
And there we have, debt service, which is, higher because we're paying more principal. The Roberts Mill is a carryover. They bumped that up slightly because they think it may cost more, because it's been delayed. And the water tank and the standpipe are also carried over, but when we did the budget last year, there's a, one, company, huh?
Do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, jump in, jump in.
Okay. So we've been talking with a vendor with regard to the rehabilitation of the elevated water tank and the standpipe. And they have a program basically where they will amortize the cost of the rehabilitation project over a 3-year period. We are working on a request for proposal, an RFP, to go out for that service because it is obviously a huge dollar amount still. So we're anticipating being able to spread that cost across a few years if we go either with this vendor or a similar vendor if we find that other vendors offer a similar program. And the idea with this is basically that there will be regularly scheduled inspections and coating maintenance to prolong the life of the coatings that we're gonna put on the tanks when we do the rehabilitation in the next couple of years. So the idea is we're gonna spend a little bit of money each year to keep on top of them, so that we can prolong the life of them, so that we won't be looking at another, $750,000 project as quickly. Sooner or later, that kind of rehab will be necessary again, but we can, by doing a little more regular maintenance, we can extend the life of those coatings and both the tank and the standpipe. So that's why the drop. So hopefully that will play out that way. We'll get the RFP out and award a bid to be able to rehab the tanks and spread it across a few years.
Okay, he has $100,000, for the water department for a mini backhoe and trailer. 20,000 for new pumps, and then the, under sewer equipment, the belt filter press is being carried over, and then the 90,000 is for a new vehicle with, custom bed and crane so they can pull pumps, and it's got a 9-foot plow on it. And then the Roberts Mill sewer has been carried over.
All right, any questions on the utility capital outlay budget? All right, anything additional wish to add, Jim or Barry?
To jump in, because I know not everybody was here for this last year. The Roberts Mill project, we've mentioned a few times, that's we've applied for funding through the state for, this will be the third year now, to be able to do basically replacement or rehabilitation of water, sewer, and storm drains, essentially a streetscape project for Roberts Mill Road. And we've been awarded, we haven't been awarded any grant funds, but we've been awarded the option for MDE financing for 2 of the 3 at this point. We got 1 the first year, 2 the second year, or maybe the 3rd year. So hopefully this year we'll get the financing for all 3 because we need all 3 pieces to make the project feasible for us. And we did, as you may recall, with our Sustainable Communities renewal, we extended the boundary of the sustainable community area to include this stretch of Roberts Mill Road. So that's one more thing we can check off on the funding application, that now it's also within a sustainable community designated area. So we're hoping that with that and some little tweaks we made to the applications this year, that hopefully we'll get all 3 this year, or this coming year.
Great. All right, any questions from council on the budget as a whole? Okay, since we're doing well on time, do we have any comments from the gallery?
That's been all for me. I appreciate the fact that you're putting so much effort into this whole, the issue with the police officers. That's a very slippery slope, and I appreciate you all putting so much consideration into that.
Appreciate it, thank you. It's one of the most important parts of what we do is being good stewards of the money that we receive from the taxpayers. We have very limited sources of revenue being a municipality in Maryland, so doing the most with what we can is absolutely key. With nothing else to discuss, I will seek a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
I'm sorry?
Just on the agenda, talked about the tax rate constant yield. I don't know if we've kind of.
Oh, I thought we talked about that at the very beginning.
It was mentioned.
Well,
but
It was mentioned.
Okay,
Okay.
You wanna talk some more?
that's all right.
So we're gonna keep the tax rate the same, and we'll get $83,000 more dollars.
Right. Yeah, it's not an
much,
increase.
but-
That's the key.
So the plan is to move forward with that direction, right?
I believe so. There was no discussion
I
otherwise
don't
on
know, Brad,
that.
you wanna raise tax?
I'd prefer we didn't. Do you want to raise tax?
Dan does.
Revenue.
It's revenue, I know. Dan wants to raise taxes?
Doesn't.
All right,
I think
no.
we need to consider that throughout the rest of the year as we do stuff, ways to
Find revenue.
ways.
All right, we did have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Thank you for your evening, folks.